I think by now, if you have been watching my reviews, you may have already picked up on a preference that I have for more slice of life kinds of stories. I tend to like movies that don't really have much of a point by the end, and Seven Chinese Brothers is no exception to that. This movie has a bit of a mumblecore feel to it. It's a pretty mundane story overall, and it's centered around people living smaller kinds of lifestyles. Jason Schwartzman plays a character named Larry. He is a polysubstance user, and he's also a bit of a jerk, you know. Not too many people really have the patience for him, but he is still charming in his own way. He's the type of person that tries to make a joke out of everything, but I think the comic brilliance of this movie is really just that he's actually not that funny at all. He's more just a character that is funny to watch on screen, but I think if you were actually in the same room with him, you probably would not find him very funny at all. Larry is surrounded by a small community of friends and family. Most notably, there's his grandmother, who he visits often at her nursing home. And then there's also his friend and drug dealer Norwood, who also happens to work at the very same nursing home that his grandmother is living in. And I would say it's a little bit hard to tell who he's more excited to see whenever he goes there. Larry gets his drugs in kind of an alternative way. He just gets hooked up because his friend Norwood happens to be a bit of a corrupt nurse at the facility, and that is something that I find kind of endearing. It's also something that I can relate to because back in my drinking and drugging days, I was kind of the same way, you know? I used to always tell people that I just don't have the social skills to actually find a drug dealer, but I am resourceful enough to find other ways, you know. And for many years, my drug dealer was either the local pharmacy or the local bulk food store. Larry is also very afraid of intimacy, which is also something I feel I can relate to. You can tell that he is interested in women and he definitely experiences romantic feelings, but when he has the chance to connect with someone throughout this story, he ends up either sabotaging it or he just runs away. He seems to live in a very typical American town, and I think that setting complements the humanistic qualities of this story very well. And, I know this film was shot in Austin, Texas, and I don't really know anything about Austin, but just from the way that they depict it in this movie, they make it look pretty idyllic. It doesn't seem like it'd be a very exciting place to live, but for me at least, it actually seems kind of dreamy. It just looks like a town that's got fair weather and affordable housing and a lot of cozy motels. I really love how the events of this movie are just not really that well connected, because I think that's just how life is. And I thought it was nice to see life represented in such a mundane way. Where it's kind of like we all have maybe like 3 or 4 things going on in our lives at any given time, whether that's within our social lives or within our work lives or whatever it is, And it seems that those things, whatever's happening to us, those things end up being a pretty good reflection of who we are in that moment in time. And I get the sense that that's really what this movie is trying to convey. I think it's really just about how, the events in our lives really couldn't have played out in any other way for anybody else. And I'd say that watching this movie has got me to think about how, if I were able to take an outside look at my own life, I think it would just look a lot different than I realize. And sometimes I feel like I only really get a glimpse of how I became the person I am today. I think in this movie, Larry is he's just being himself, and I admire that. And like I said, I don't think he would be a very easy person to be around, but for me anyway, I feel like he's just the type of person that I naturally have a lot of affection for, and I think that's because I just see so much of myself in him. And that's why I love this movie so much. My first job was actually working at a movie theater, and watching Seven Chinese Brothers reminds me of that time in my life a lot, because that is a time when I was doing a lot of drinking. I remember I stole wine from the theater because at that theater they would host these opera events and they would sell wine at those events, you know. So there was always wine on premises, right? And it was just so easy to like go into the back room and grab a bottle. And there were also a bunch of nights where, you know, if I were working more of a closing shift, I would see sometimes I would want to watch the movies that we were playing, right? So I might slip into the theater if the start time happened to kind of line up with the time I was clocking out, you know? And whenever I would do that, I would also sneak in like a Mickey of rum or something like that. And, you know, it was always like, it was like the last screening of the night. It was basically an empty theater. It was always just me and like a few other people. And that's what I would do. I would just go in there, drink by myself, and watch a great movie at my workplace. And I know that may sound sad to a lot of you. And in hindsight, I was pretty sad back then. So you are correct. But I will say at least that at the time, I was pretty convinced that I was having the time of my life. And by the time the movie was over, you know, everybody from the day shift had already gone home, you know, and it was really just the night crew left. And so when I was leaving the theater, there was just no way that I was going to run into anybody that I knew. And so it was just one of the easiest things to get away with, right? And, you know, anyway, the only reason I'm sharing all of this is just to illustrate why I feel such a kinship with the character of Larry. Bob Byington wrote and directed this movie, and I would say, at least for me, he's a talent to watch. He's got a rather quiet career, but also a notable one as well. And he just seems like a very interesting guy to me, because in doing my research for this movie, I learned that after he finished his first 2 films, he decided to go on a 10-year sabbatical from filmmaking, and he called it a God-appointed sabbatical. And I think that is just such a wonderful way to be, if you know what I mean. Like, to approach your art in that way. This movie is only about 1 hour and 14 minutes long. It's a little shorter than your average feature, and it's very easy to get through. And I would say if anything I have said in this review resonates with you, then I can assure you, you are the target audience for this one. And I have no doubts that you would really enjoy this film.